Welcome to week 15. We're dealing basically with the textbook's conclusion, patterns, change, and the future of U.S. foreign policy. That's one of these things that authors feel compelled to do, is to try and forecast what's going to happen in the future. Um, Rosati and Scott talk a lot about the idea of competing theoretical models. What's going to happen in the future? Are we going to have more of an elitist kind of foreign policy like we had prior to World War II, where basically you have a very coherent foreign policy establishment that basically does stuff? Are we going to have a more pluralistic environment where competing elites kind of attach themselves to the political parties and compete with one another over the future of foreign policy? Or are we entering an increasingly hyper-pluralist environment where something that Francis Fukuyama has described as vitocracy, where increasingly competing sides find ways of stopping the other from acting so that we govern by stasis and in a highly reactive manner rather than being forward-looking and anticipating what's going on in the future. This chapter talks a bit about making foreign policy since World War II. That you had sort of an emerging pluralism during the Cold War. You had pretty much a Cold War consensus for much of the early period of the Cold War. Then you have the fragmenting of that with the Vietnam War, which basically broke the foreign policy establishment into rival parts. More of a neoliberal part versus a neoconservative part. And then you have, really kind of a continuation of politics. It's interesting when you look at, from Bush to Obama and then from Obama to Trump. Even though you're looking at very different people, there has been quite a bit of continuity in terms of what's been going on. It's interesting that, people thought, well, Obama's going to change everything from Bush. Well, in point of fact, yes, he tried to wind down the war in Iraq as rapidly as possible and get U.S. troops out, but he surged in Afghanistan. He actually put more troops in at various times. The reality is, and I say this a lot in my classes on the presidency, in foreign policy, and elsewhere, presidents act with enormous power at their disposal, but they also act within the framework of enormous institutional restraints. The National Security Council is an advisory body, but it is also a body that kind of is putting training wheels on the foreign policy process. It's instructive when you look at it. The Russians, and the Syrians used chemical weapons again in Syria. Trump tweeted about blowing everything up and the smart missiles are coming. But then the next thing you hear, is Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, saying, yeah, we're not going to do anything stupid here. And the reality is we haven't done anything stupid in the near term. And so that kind of illustrates the nature of foreign policy. Presidents are powerful, but they're not omnipotent, and they're not able to just do whatever they want. They have to work, they have to create consensus within their own administration in order to get things done. Because the one thing Trump doesn't want to see is Mattis resigning. He really can't afford it. In terms of foreign policy change, the real question is going forward, what's going to happen to state? What is going to happen to the institutions that go into, formulating foreign policy when you have a president that doesn't believe in institutions and doesn't believe in formulating foreign policy, that believes in kind of flying by the seat of his pants? The reality is that our foreign policy process from 9/11 to the global recession and now going into this age of Trump is really, we're witnessing some real significant changes. And the question is, are these changes going to be good, or are they going to be bad? Are they going to be changes that help Americans create a world that we can live in? I don't necessarily want to create an empire or anything like that, but a world that we can live in. And that's the scary thing that we're all just trying to deal with. So next week, we're going to be dealing with 3 articles out of Foreign Affairs that, again, kind of raises the questions about what kind of foreign policy Donald Trump is conducting. About this chapter, again, it's kind of a summary chapter, so it should be old hat to you. But again, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the forum or, again, directly email me. Let's learn a lot this week.